What it is, cuckolds. It's your boy, the hater, and it's time for another video up in this piece. Now, wrestling as we know it, I think we can all agree, is worse than it's ever been. But one thing that nobody ever talks about is the lack of dominance. Now, what do I mean by this? Well, surely we've had dominant champions, right? Like Gunther was a quote-unquote dominant Intercontinental Champion, and Rey Mysterio is like a jobber now, even though he was like a main event type guy back in the day. So clearly, there are some differences in hierarchies. And of course, we've had Roman Reigns, and to a lesser degree nowadays, Brock Lesnar as dominant long-term champions. However, there's more to dominance than being a champion for a long time. Dominance is having things like squash matches and having a hierarchy where it is evident who is on top of the hierarchy. So, let's illustrate this with a great example of an actual hierarchy called the stable known as the bloodline, right? The stable starts out, Roman Reigns is the reason that the stable exists. It's the stable's raison d'etre, if you will, right? So because of Roman Reigns, this stable exists, and now people like Jimmy and Jey Uso, who have been mid-card nobodies their entire careers, tag team pre-show nobodies, wrestling like Epico and Primo on the literal pre-show of WrestleMania, are now prominently featured wrestlers. Solo Sikoa, who was a directionless nobody in NXT, is now a big deal. He is now the Lackey of Roman Reigns. But even though he's a Lackey that gets consistent TV time. Now, fast forward a little bit, we've got the new bloodline, the Lackeys of the Lackey, right? So without, beating a dead horse, because we all know how that goes, let's get to how this is being booked, especially in the light of Crown Stool, which was yesterday. Now, this entire idea here of Crown Stool was almost like a reestablishment of the hierarchy, but with new precision, right? With new rankings, if you will. So we've had now, in the storyline, Roman Reigns and the Usos are now equals. So Roman Reigns can never elevate someone like Jimmy Uso or even Jey Uso, and sure as shit cannot elevate the new bloodline into main event status. Nobody can, because they suck. So what has to happen now if they're equals is Roman Reigns has to be demoted to mid-card nobody status. And as far as I'm concerned, and this is consistent with the Triple H era, nothing matters anymore. The accomplishments of Roman Reigns and the fact that he was champion for 3 years are now painted with a new brush. Because now Roman Reigns, who hadn't gotten pinned, I should say, for years, is now prone to getting pinned by Solo Sikoa, who was wrestling Carmelo Hayes in competitive matches a few years ago in NXT. So there you have it. I don't think I have anything more to say about that, but nevertheless, we must continue our analysis up in this mug. So, the dominance of Roman Reigns is now retconned as being not really dominance, but being exactly what it was this whole time. His family keeping him afloat, and him being a non-worthy champion who would have gotten his ass beat by the likes of the aforementioned Rey Mysterio, who is now a jobber, Kevin Owens, Sami Zayn, everybody, right? Including Jey Uso, if it weren't for the fact that other people had his back. So Roman Reigns comes out looking like a loser. As far as I'm concerned, I don't care what anybody else says. Roman Reigns is no longer a big star, and quite frankly, I don't give a flying fuck if he wrestles ever again. I know I'm not alone in this. I know people also like him, but I know a lot of people are disappointed in this current run of Roman Reigns. Now, let's get to it. Let's get to the actual analysis, cucks. In this reestablished hierarchy, one thing that is clear is that there is no more dominance in wrestling as a medium, right? The last person to have any kind of dominance in any kind of wrestling show was Wardlow. He was the last guy who would come out and just destroy people. You always need someone to do this. If you don't have someone that's doing this, how are you going to establish the next big thing? A great example, it's in the name. The next big thing, Brock Lesnar. Brock Lesnar debuts, destroys 3 jobbers. Then he sets his sights on the Hardys, who are already, at that time, even though they're in their 20s, a legendary tag team. Brock Lesnar just murders them both 2-on-1 at the pay-per-view, right? Before you know it, Lesnar wins the King of the Ring. Before you know it, Lesnar becomes the World Heavyweight Champion. He beats The Rock. He beats Triple H. Then eventually he beats Hogan. He beats everybody, motherfucks. He's out there beating everybody like left and right. Now, they also beat him once in a while, but he becomes the world champion by beating, I believe he beat Hulk Hogan, by pretty much ending Hogan's career, more or less, right? That was the last competitive match that Hogan had in the sense that where he was still a main eventer. And Lesnar just murdered him, which was fine. Now, with all this being said, cuckwads, where is the next Brock Lesnar? Braun Breaker is out there trading wins and losses with Jey Uso. Braun Breaker is out there having competitive matches with the likes of Ilya Dragunov. Now, I know some of you are high on Ilya Dragunov. Now, people think that Ilya Dragunov is going to be the serious contender. Ilya Dragunov is going to be a mixture of the next Apollo Crews and the next Nakamura. He's going to be the next Apollo Crews. Like, he's going to have an Apollo Crews career. In a few weeks, he'll be doing absolutely nothing. If he's lucky, he'll have like a IC title run in 5 years, and then he'll be released. That's what's going to happen. He's not going to be anything, right? So the fact that we're wasting time with this guy having competitive matches with people is a travesty. Now, all this being said, cucks, the facts are the facts. We need dominant wrestlers who act like dominant wrestlers. Not people that say they're dominant wrestlers and then don't wrestle. Including my personal favorite right now, Braun Breaker, like I just said. You know, I'm not sold that he's a badass because a badass doesn't wrestle once every 3 weeks. A badass wrestles every week. A badass is there kicking ass and taking names, not talking shit. That's the way that this guy needs to be booked. You know, but nobody has been booked this way in a long, long time. Everyone's kind of booked in like these 50-50 nobodies. Like nobody stands out. That's the way that it should be said. Nobody stands out. Gunther doesn't stand out. Let me ask you, if Gunther were to wrestle Bronson Reed, right? Let's just say Gunther drops the title next week to, I don't know, Sami Zayn, fuck it, right? And Gunther is now in his post-title run phase. And he wrestles Bronson Reed the next night, right? Or in 2 weeks after, right? Would it be a shock if Bronson Reed wins? I don't think so, right? If you wrestle Seth Rollins, would it be a shock if Seth Rollins just wins? Not at all, right? But if Seth Rollins were to beat Brock Lesnar when Lesnar was the champion, that's a shock, right? That's like, holy shit, I can't believe they did this. That's the impression you would get. You see what I'm saying? That's the problem. Nobody stands out because nobody's good enough. And the problem with that then, of course, snowballs into if nobody's good enough, then why the fuck would anyone care about Gunther versus Cody Rhodes? Like, let me ask you this. Cody Rhodes beat Gunther for the Crown Stool title. Let's just say that Gunther had beaten Cody Rhodes for the Crown Stool title. What would change? Who would give a flying fuck? Would anyone think to themselves, oh man, I can't believe Gunther beat Cody. It should have been the other way around. What would change? Not one person would give a rat's ass if Gunther had won. Just like not one person gives a rat's ass that Cody Rhodes has won. That's the problem. We have a bunch of mediocres doing mediocre things. Like Seth Rollins saying to Bronson Reed, I'll make you famous. What the fuck are you talking about? Seth Rollins has been in the company for like 14, 15 years or something to that number, to that magnitude. But he doesn't feel like one that's been there that long. He just feels like a regular guy. Him and Finn Balor feel the same. If tomorrow there's a feud, Finn Balor versus Seth Rollins, and Finn Balor wins, nobody should be surprised. Likewise, nobody should be surprised if Seth Rollins beats Finn Balor. Nobody should be surprised at anything because there is no hierarchy. Now imagine if in the Attitude Era, after losing the World Heavyweight title at WrestleMania against Stone Cold, The Rock comes out the next day and it's going to be The Rock versus Albert, right? If Albert beat The Rock on the next episode of Raw after WrestleMania, it would be the biggest upset in the history of wrestling. The expectation for that match would be The Rock comes out, Rock bottoms Albert, hits the people's elbow, and calls out Stone Cold. In other words, in that scenario that I just gave, Albert is a prop to move the story forward. Nowadays, when Gunther loses the title, if his next feud is against Chad Gable, and Chad Gable beats him, nobody should be surprised. See what I'm getting at? Nobody feels like a star. Nobody feels like a champion. And nobody feels, most importantly, like a big deal. There are no more big deals in wrestling, cucks. And that's all I got to say about that today. Cuckwads!